The US government just banned Claude AI. The Pentagon called Anthropic a national security threat. And within hours, literally hours, Sam Altman posted on X that OpenAI just signed a deal with the Department of War to deploy their models on a classified network. This whole thing escalated fast. So let me walk you through exactly what happened because this story is wild and it raises some questions that I think we all need to be thinking about. Welcome back. I'm Zarif. If you've been following the AI space at all this week, you've probably seen the headlines. It's Pentagon versus Anthropic. Trump is banning Claude. Sam Altman is coming in. There's a lot of noise out there. So I just wanted to cut through it and walk you through the full timeline of what actually happened because I've been following this like really closely on X. So I'm going to screen share through some of the key posts and statements so you can see it for yourself. So to understand any of this, you've got to rewind a few months back. Anthropic signed a $200 million contract with the Pentagon. This was a huge deal. I bet the sales rep got paid out massively on this, but essentially it was Claude getting deployed across the entire US defense infrastructure. And at the time, it seemed like a huge win for Anthropic. They were getting into the government space, in the public sector in general, and they were competing directly with OpenAI for those contracts. And since that time, the Anthropic models have gotten so much better that it seemed like the clear choice, especially for large effectively the largest enterprise out there, the US government. However, you may remember a few months ago with the whole Maduro mission and taking over the Venezuelan leader, that was a really big deal. And that's where things started to get complicated, right? Reports came out, and that's when the Wall Street Journal was reporting on Anthropic's tech being used in the operation to capture the Venezuelan president Maduro. And now the details are murky. It's unclear exactly how Claude was used and all that. It seems like a war mission more than an AI mission. But that's where the tension really started to build between Anthropic and the Pentagon because it raised the question, what is this technology actually being used for? Is it really just being used for work summaries, or is it actually being used to carry out missions for the US government? So at one point, Anthropic essentially drew the line. They came out and put guardrails on the use cases. I think there were a number of use cases that they put hard lines on, but there are two specific hard lines that they've made public. Number one, no mass domestic surveillance of American citizens. And then number two, no fully autonomous weapons, meaning no AI can make kill decisions without a human in the loop. So, there can't be like a Claude AI and a drone or something like that. So Anthropic said that they support all lawful uses for the AI when it comes to national security, but these two things were non-negotiable, and the Pentagon wanted unrestricted access, all lawful purposes, no limits. So I think that is where tensions really started to rise. So if we fast forward a couple days, that's where Pete Hegseth comes out and calls out Anthropic publicly. On Friday, right after the 5 p.m. deadline passed where Anthropic and the US government would reach a deal, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, goes on X and drops this post. He's basically calling out Anthropic's stance fundamentally incompatible with American principle. He says that the relationship with the U.S. armed forces is permanently altered. And then the big move, he designates Anthropic as a supply chain risk to national security. Now, that designation historically is reserved for U.S. adversaries like competing countries, et cetera. And now he's declared an American company effectively a U.S. adversary. He's basically saying no contractor, no supplier, nobody doing business with the U.S. military can work with Anthropic anymore. So after that monumental post, Anthropic responds in a blog post. It's the CEO of Dario, essentially firing back with a formal statement. They said they tried to, in good faith, reach an agreement that would be beneficial for both sides. They point out that these two exceptions haven't affected a single government mission today. So Dario argues that today's AI models aren't reliable enough for fully autonomous weapons, and that mass surveillance violates fundamental rights. So here's the kicker. They say that the secretary doesn't even have the legal authority to make the designations the way he did, and they're going to challenge it in court. So now they're going to court. Their exact words, no amount of intimidation will change our position. So they are taking a hard stance. They are, effectively all in on this decision that they've made. And if that wasn't crazy enough, now Trump is stepping in, and this is what he responded with. So essentially, Trump gets himself involved directly. He posts on Truth Social directing that every federal agency in the United States government to cease all use of Anthropic's technology. Then he goes on some, typical spiel that he usually goes on, calls in the radical left. There's a 6-month phase out for agencies like the Department of War. And he says that Anthropic better get their act together or he'll use the full power of the presidency to make them comply with major civil and criminal consequences. Now that's nuts. At this point, it's going to be a tech CEO versus a president. Come on, man. How much crazier can it get? So at that point, everyone thought the news was over. But as usual, the story keeps going. At this point, Sam Altman swoops in, and within hours, he posts on X that they've reached an agreement with the Department of War to deploy OpenAI models in their classified network. This is just hours after the deadline for the Anthropic US government deal. So that's how fast OpenAI moved. We saw this, just a few days earlier where they swooped up Claude bot and are now working with that. So man, Anthropic is making some missteps, even though their models are increasing and getting better every day. So Altman says in that same post that OpenAI's deal includes the same two red lines Anthropic was fighting for. So no mass surveillance, human responsibility for use of force. The Pentagon apparently agreed to those terms with OpenAI. So I'm wondering why not Anthropic? It sounds like Sam Altman, as usual, is willing to sell out for any amount of money. So I guess we'll see what ends up happening. Quick thing before we keep going. If this type of stuff interests you, I run an AI community where we stay on top of all of this as it develops. So things move fast in the space. If you want to contribute to the conversation, I have a group that's tracking it all together. I'll drop the link to my school community in the description. So we'd love to have you there. All right, at this point, let's talk about some of the big questions. These are some things that are on my mind after going through X and the posts and what my friends have been talking about. The first one is this what kills Anthropic? Obviously their models have gotten way better. People have started to use Claude as the main LLM just because it's so powerful, especially with what we've seen with Claude Cowork. But you've got the president of the United States telling every single federal agency to stop using the product. You've got the Pentagon calling you a national security threat, and your biggest competitor just took your contract. That's a lot of damage in a matter of 1 week. So Anthropic says individual and commercial customers aren't affected, but this signal sends a lot of different mixed signals to enterprises and end users, right? And then obviously they just raise a big round. So what does this mean to their investors? You can't ignore all of this stuff, especially something relating to a $200 million contract. And I think the biggest thing is just being labeled a supply chain risk by the US government. That's not something you can shake off. I wonder what this means to the rest of their enterprise business. Another question of this is Sam Altman's morals, right? He started off as a nonprofit, became for profit, and all of a sudden he's able to win this deal, apparently with the same red lines as Anthropic. So you've got to question, if he's actually supporting, no mass surveillance and oversight on AI weapons. How did they get the deal with those same two red lines? Why not Anthropic as the deal that they had? So is this something that he'll fold on for the contract? I think it raises those questions. He's going to get what it takes to win the contract and then fold when it comes down to it. I wonder how he ended up getting that contract. So that is going to be interesting to see how it develops and if he follows on those red lines. All right. So this one is a bit conspiratorial and a bit extreme. But if you think about it, Trump is threatening Anthropic with major civil and criminal consequences. The Secretary of War designated Anthropic as a national security risk. If the government decides that Anthropic's AI is critical to national defense and Anthropic won't play ball, what happens? We've seen the government invoke national security powers before. Could they force Anthropic's hand? Could they compel access? I'm not saying it's likely, but the fact that we're even having this conversation makes you think how high the stakes are. Fourth big question that a lot of people are talking about on social media is how China is also developing AI. You see, with China, they're not necessarily putting guardrails on their AI, no matter the use case. They're focused on creating the best models. So they're not really having debates about whether AI should be used for surveillance. They're already doing it. They're not debating autonomous weapons. They're building them. They just want access to the best technology. Meanwhile, Anthropic, arguably the company building the most powerful AI models in the world, is saying no to the US military. So the question becomes, is this an AI arms race with China? Can the US afford to have the most advanced AI company sitting on the sidelines? Could there be an argument that the government needs to take control of the technology to stay competitive? It's a scary thought, but it's honestly something that people are thinking about right now. Because if you think about it, if Anthropic is truly the most capable model, you don't want to have a subpar model with OpenAI, carrying out some of the most risky missions and things like that. So I think that's another part of the debate that people have been opening up and thinking about. And then the fifth question is, who gets to decide what's right? We've seen it in the past few weeks. The AI wars are heating up. AI in general, all the models are getting better. And what's fascinating to me is that we're watching tech CEOs directly challenge the US government on what's right and what's wrong. So Dario is telling the Pentagon no. Sam Altman is walking in right behind him with the deal. These are unelected tech founders making decisions on national security, military operation, and the future of warfare. So it's kind of an interesting question. Should they have that power? Should the government be able to override them? It's not an easy one. And I think in general, these five questions are what's on people's mind at the moment. Look, I personally don't have all the answers. I'm just an observer in all this. And to be honest, I don't think anyone really does have the answers. This is like an evolving story that's gaining a lot of traction. It was on CNBC. Everyone's talking about it. The story is still developing. Anthropic is going to court. OpenAI just got the deal and the huge contract. The government is making it very clear that they're willing to go scorch earth on any AI company that doesn't fall in line. So I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell me what you think. Do you think Anthropic made the right call? Does OpenAI actually share the same values, or did they just play the game better? Could the government actually seize an AI company? And the big one is, in a world where China has no restrictions on AI, should the US be putting guardrails on its own companies? A lot to be found out in the coming weeks. It's going to be interesting, but these are the conversations that matter. So if you like this type of content, please like the video. If you want more of this, would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.